Imagine a school. What images come to mind? A building? Hallways? Classrooms filled with books, paper, pencils? An environment of creativity and inspiration. Classrooms filled with students from all over the world, studying together, learning together, growing together. The very foundation of an international school. It's been 60 years, and times have changed. Students and teachers have come and gone. But over the years, Hokkaido International School has become a symbol of internationalism in Hokkaido.
In 1953, my father in the military was stationed in Tokyo, and he got orders to go to a camp in Hokkaido called Camp Crawford. So my mother, my brother, myself, and my father moved from down in Tokyo to Camp Crawford. They had a dependent school here at Camp Crawford. It was called the Camp Crawford High School, although we had from kindergarten through 12th grade here in Hokkaido. At that time, in 1953, Camp Crawford had been here for quite a while. I believe that it was first here back in the mid-40s. It was a permanent facility. They had permanent red brick buildings for the military, the GIs, rather than wooden barracks. All of the students were military dependents. There were no foreign students in the school at that time.
Camp Crawford students had only been military dependents, but they weren't the only foreign residents living in Hokkaido at that time. Among the residents were missionaries and their children. In the mid-1950s, changes were made to allow these children from missionary families to attend the Camp Crawford school alongside the military dependents.
At the same time, Shitoshi was a U.S. Air Force base, a small U.S. Air Force base, and the dependents of those Air Force families were bused to Camp Crawford High School every day, 20 miles on a brown Army bus, and they were members of the school as well. They were part of the 30 students from 9th through 12th grade. We learned to ski here. We had all the winter activities. We had Boy Scouts, Teenage Club, so there was a lot of activity for the children my age, 14 and 15 years old, while we were here. The one thing about being a military dependent is you learn that you're not going to be in any one place too long, so you make friends, and some of those friends you keep throughout your lifetime.
Suddenly, in 1958, Camp Crawford was closed. As a result, several families who had been allowed to send their children to the school there were left without an educational facility. This presented a problem for those families. So, in February of 1958, a room was found and held classes there for those few children. Later, the school was moved to a Christian center, where classes were held for the next 4 years.
1961, it was my turn to enter first grade, and I knew I was destined to sit in one of the front desks, because in this one-room schoolhouse, we all sat side by side, but the young kids in the front and going back. If I recall correctly, there was the teacher's desk in the front, and it was Miss Seltzer who taught everything, who led everything.
Miss Seltzer was the head teacher for several years at the beginning of the school, and she accomplished a great deal towards developing educational standards, practices, and the curriculum. This in turn laid a solid foundation for the educational programs at the small school. This was only a temporary solution. The parents soon organized an effort not to find a building, but to build their own. And by 1962, they had accomplished the goal of constructing their own building on their own piece of land. The school had gone from one teacher in a one-room schoolhouse to housing a staff of professional teachers in a new, modern school building big enough to hold 80 students.
My first grade year was the last year in that one-room schoolhouse. The move was very dramatic, actually. Relative to the one-room schoolhouse, it was huge. It completely changed school life because there were separate classrooms. And so now we were really in classes for the first time with our grade. There was also a multi-purpose room in the basement, served as the music room, as the performance space. But the fact that we had separate classrooms created a completely different dynamic in terms of our relationship as a community as a whole.
Originally, the school was called American School, but again, the parents realized this really wasn't quite correct, and they changed the name to Hokkaido International School. HIS turned 10 in 1968, just as the city of Sapporo was preparing to celebrate its centennial. The 1970s would prove to be an important time of change for the city of Sapporo, and with it, the foreign population of the island of Hokkaido. After the centennial celebration, Sapporo prepared for and held the 1972 Winter Olympics, which instantly propelled Sapporo into the international spotlight. Television cameras and telephoto lenses were trained on Sapporo, as people across the world watched athletes compete in venues across the city. It goes without saying that this led to an influx of foreign visitors, but it also led to changes within the city and to the way of life for residents of Sapporo, foreign and Japanese. In order to prepare for the Olympics, the city of Sapporo began the construction of a subway system. With the advent of modern, reliable transportation, life in Sapporo became more convenient and more appealing to the international community that was building across the city.
I came to Sapporo in 1977 as an English conversation teacher for the Lutheran Church. It was located downtown, central Sapporo on Odori Park, and one of the contracts that I had was teaching for HIS.
Teaching and learning continued at HIS throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. During that era, most of the hallmarks of the school community we see today were already in place. Academics, of course, but also drama, music, sports, and even excursions into the wilderness, camping and hiking. Early on, teachers at HIS realized the value of utilizing their surroundings. A metropolis for sure, but nestled away in an expanse of wilderness.
Hokkaido was really rather isolated, even during the 1980s. All of the flights went to Tokyo or Osaka, and then you could go out of the country. Also, the technology was so different then. There was no Skype, no computer, no internet, no smartphones. The list goes on. So we were really rather isolated.
I rarely saw a Western face. And of course, when I did, it was like, oh, there's another foreigner. But it was so rare. And that was going downtown every day, that even in central Sapporo, you seldom saw people that were not Asian.
The late 1980s and early 1990s saw HIS continue to grow, adding on a high school 1 year at a time to meet the needs of the community. With new grades meant more students, and with more students, this meant more classes and more teachers to teach them. HIS has always been a small school, but in the 1990s, it was growing in a big way.
It was the fall of 1994 and my first time to Japan, to Asia. The environment was quite different. The student-teacher relationship at HIS, at this small school, was quite unique. And that's what I love about HIS. There's really that student-teacher bond, and that's what I still continue to love about this school.
School life at HIS in the early 1990s was complex. On the one hand, the school was as bustling and as busy as ever, with new high school grades added on and teachers sometimes teaching multiple subjects. But at the same time, there was a growing undercurrent of frustration and anxiety about some limitations which were clearly holding the school back.
Because we were a small school and we doubled up the classes, our offerings were necessarily few. And like sports, we only had one sport, basketball. And our extracurricular activities were necessarily limited. At that time, in 1994, the building was quite old.
The building was really in very bad condition, and we would not really be able to repair it. Also, it was very small, and the design of the building really wasn't keeping up with the needs of the school.
So space and building were a limiting factor. In fact, the 6th grade homeroom, as well as the high school math classes and the library, all took place in one room. So we were just kind of with the high school, middle school, elementary, early years, all in this rather small school, just kind of busting at the seams.
The dilemma was clear and everybody saw it. HIS needed a way to realize its potential and move beyond the aging building. It didn't take long for that solution to present itself, just when HIS was moving in a new direction.
We needed a new headmaster, and we hired Dr. McLean. Dr. McLean had been a high school principal in Indiana for 25 years.
I met Dr. McLean over the phone. He called me to ask if I was interested in teaching at HIS. He had gotten my name from recommended by someone else, and he was eager to hire someone in Sapporo if possible. He was warm and friendly, and also had a vision.
He was fearless, you know, being a high school principal for so long. He had had a lot of experience and he had a lot of confidence. This was an excellent match for us at this time, because when he came and we said, well, we need a new building, he wasn't afraid of this. He was willing to go forward and to talk about it and to consider that. And together with the executive board and Dr. McLean, then we were able to make more concrete plans and to begin planning for the new building.
I was allowed to be part of the design process of the new HIS building. I remember the architect opening up some blueprints to show me the current design, and I took a look at it and I asked, can I make some changes? And to my surprise, he said, sure. So that night I went home and I sketched out some ideas I had for the new science lab, and I showed it to the architect, and he said, yeah, we can do this. And not only did he take my design, my kind of layout for the classroom, like where the benches would go and where the instructor's table should be, he took suggestions on materials for like the chemistry lab bench and for the cabinetry. So that was a great feeling.
The new building was completed during the summer of 1995. The project had brought together the community and drew ideas from its members. This included the opening of a new dormitory on campus, realized by generous contribution from the Hokkaido prefectural government. With support from the city of Sapporo, Hokkaido International School was able to finish construction just in time for the 1995 school year. This allowed many new students to join the school community as it opened the doors to the new building.
The enrollment had already increased tremendously over the summer. Teachers that were coming back were now anticipating that many more new students that they were going to welcome for the first time.
It seemed like the new building had generated a buzz and an excitement around the expat community, and the enrollment had increased. And then the next year, we had another big jump in enrollment. So those first 2 years I spent at the building it was just amazing to see the growth of the school community and kind of the vitality that HIS had now had because of the new building and the new students growing all at the same time?
I first came to HS in 1997, subbing for some teachers in the elementary school. After that, I began working part-time initially in the ELL department. At the time, it was called the ESL department. And I was assigned to literally a closet. The ESL department worked in a closet in the back of the elementary. A year after that, we clearly needed more space, so they reconstructed a balcony just off to the side of that. And I worked there for probably another 4 years.
New teachers were brought on staff to meet the needs of HIS's growing student body. Growing staff and growing programs meant a growing need for working and learning space.
Kind of from the beginning, we just had space issues. The school had grown quite quickly in that early period of time after moving to this building. And that really became a really pronounced problem as the music department started to grow under the Suginos.
I came here 2000. When I came here, then one of the secretary guided me to the music room. And the first impression was, oh my goodness, this is so small. It's just so tiny.
The music room was inadequate to take the entire secondary choir or a large group of students, especially if the students came together.
Space is really issue because we put a drum set and 5 saxophone players and 10 trombones and all the others. It's just really so hot and crowded and it's so noisy.
So they had to rely on the gym or the multipurpose room as they continue to do so today. And so those issues really did percolate up pretty quickly for us.
Increased enrollment in the school itself led to the increased popularity of the dormitory program. As a result, the school was forced to create a waiting list, and school leadership were tasked with addressing the increase in applications. The solution was the procurement of additional dormitory space.
I really felt that there was a need for us to expand. We're not realizing growth and just income as a school to move forward without a second dormitory program. So I worked with our school's real estate agent, and he was able to find an apartment building quite close to Sumikawa Station that had originally been built for university students. And we went to look at that, and that just seemed to be the first kind of the perfect fit for a temporary solution to our problem. And so we rented that and began the second dormitory program down there. And then that, of course, immediately initiated a review of our current facilities and a need for an expansion. So we began to plan for the extension to the current dormitory. And that was the beginning point for all of that.
I've been living in Sumikawa Dorm for almost 2 years now. There's a lot of good things about Sumikawa Dorm. One of the bad things is probably we live next to the supermarket and the station. Supermarket for us is really important during weekends because we must get food during weekend, and which the school didn't have food for us. So for us living next to the supermarket, we get food easily, which helps us save a lot of times. And one of the disadvantages about living in Dorm 2 is that it's really far from Dorm 1. And the dorm in campus is a place that we eat dinner and breakfast both. For dinner, we probably just need to leave the dorm I'm living right now 10 minutes before dinner. But for breakfast, we must wake up 30 minutes before everyone else because we take 20 minutes to prepare for school and 10 minutes to walk. So that's one of the bad things about Dorm 2.
We knew from the start that the Sumikawa apartments that we had rented there were not going to be a permanent solution for us. It was a much older building. It was looking a little tired inside, and certainly the decor was of the era. The rooms were small on the smaller size, and there are, of course, a couple advantages to being quite close to Sumikawa. But in general, the distance from the current facilities, having to walk up for meals at the main dormitory, we knew those weren't going to work out in time, so we began to work on a more permanent solution right away from the very beginning.
School leadership began to formally consider solutions to HIS's need for more dormitory space. The vehicle for this was an interdisciplinary group called the Building and Grounds Committee. The primary role of this group was to review the physical assets of the school in view of its changing needs. The group included members from the executive board, but also teachers as well.
I was brought onto the Building and Grounds Committee to give a teacher's perspective. As part of that role, I went around and interviewed the current teaching staff and office staff, even the janitors, and just to find out what their needs were and what they might desire in a new building. However, there was some land issues, and so we decided to put the new building project on hold and just focus on the new dormitory project.
The Building and Grounds Committee, along with the Executive Board, really began to focus on the dormitory expansion first of all. I think that not only did we see that that was an area for growth for us in our location in particular, but just Japan-wide too. That whole trend is taking off among other international schools as well. So we really did begin to put our focus in that direction. And I think just in terms of fortunate timing, we just happened to have on staff a teacher who had been an architect. And she was teaching an architect and design class for us, and it just really made sense to invite her into that process and have her students put some thought to what a potential dormitory could look like.
My initial thought was, yes, of course, we can do that as such an amazing opportunity to involve the students with it. And after the initial thought was the fear of what would that look like and what needs to happen in order for the students to be part of it. So I did think about it and came back saying, yes, we'll be more than happy to do that. The students themselves, I don't think they quite grasped the idea of what that meant. I don't think they quite picture what it means to create a design, but as the process started, of course, more and more questions came and more understanding of the process.
When Ms. Marinova walked in with this project, I was so very excited because this is very hands-on, where we actually get to do something. I didn't know it was going to get made, but the idea that something like this was actually feasible, that something like this would actually get made, that is what made me really excited. It was a learning process because I didn't have the skills to actually design something.
When the class started, it was, to be understood, very difficult initial part of the process, as none of the students had any previous experience with designing buildings. You really have no starting point. The starting point was me creating a slideshow where I was showing students different aspects of architectural drawings and what the final product looks like. Site plans, I showed them also cross sections, elevations, just the language that architects use in order to convey their ideas, because the students and people in general have ideas, but they don't have the tools, they don't have the language of putting those ideas on paper.
Basically, the class was divided in 2 parts, and then each group had almost an equal number of people, and then you had to come up with an entire plan, so which would do the exterior, the basement plan, each different room, every floor, the floor plan, the blueprint, and the interior designing part, which I did. Very exciting. I think this project, it really connected to this virtue that we promote in our school, which is being an understanding collaborator.
That was the point that students really had to figure out what collaboration in architectural world really meant, because once when you're involved with your own work, you forget that any tiny little change you make will affect others. For example, shifting a window or shifting a wall, that affects the people below you, people above you. So I think this was the stage where people were getting a bit frustrated with each other and learning what it means to do some work and to check with people on the other side, would that work really match with their own change.
The Huskies are the learning outcomes of our school, and naturally it's the 21st century skills which have been embedded into that document. The collaboration is one of the key features of what we do. So taking this project to the students right in the classroom, in the architecture and design classroom, and having them work in that collaborative format that you would expect of an architectural-like experience that we want to provide for our students just really worked well for us. And students collaborated together in partnerships and teams, and were able to come up with a really effective design for us. We're really excited by that.
Student involvement in the dormitory expansion was not limited to Ms. Marinova's design class. The Building and Grounds Committee sought to understand the perspective of then-current dormitory students by talking directly with them. They achieved this by conducting a series of interviews with students who had been living in the dorm. Mr. Piazza was tasked with approaching dormitory students about their experiences.
As a member of the Building and Grounds Committee, I did interviews with the dorm students to find out, what are the existing problems with the dorm? What would they like to be fixed? Because I told them we were going to build a new dorm, and what improvements can we make? And I remember there was one special aha moment when I was interviewing a student, Hiro. He recognized a problem at the dorm having to do with the Genkan, that there was bikes being stored in it and skateboards, and it was just cluttered and messy. And I said, yeah, that's a problem. We should fix that.
I spent most of my time in the dorm on campus, about 5 to 6 years. And during those years, I've noticed a lot of things that can be improved upon, such as the Genkan, which is an entrance in Japanese. And one day in Mr. P's math class, he came up to me with a massive blueprint and asked me for my opinions on the dorm. And because I lived there for a few years, I had some knowledge of what's wrong. And the main one for me was bikes, because a lot of us have bikes, like 50% of us, and the Genkan is pretty small. So whenever we try to walk back home or walk outside, we'd tumble over our bikes, or the bikes would tumble on us.
As we were discussing it, maybe adding some type of bike storage room and some place to store the skateboards and maybe skis too, we noticed that we could move the parking lot where the cars park back a few meters and possibly add a room in there.
Once Mr. P brought in his blueprint, I suggested, why don't we make a spot special for the bikes and the skis?
So we started sketching up some stuff, and yeah, it seemed to work, and Hiro liked the idea. So I remember taking it to the next Building and Grounds Committee. And I said, look, if we move the parking lot a little bit, we can fit this extra room in there. And it looked really good. Plus we could add some luggage storage, and it seemed to work out really well. So that was an exciting moment. It was a student coming up with an idea that actually seemed to be incorporated. We then talked to the architect, and sure enough, the next time we saw blueprints, there was Hiro's bike and storage room added to the new layout.
This is a really big part. You constantly communicate with your client, and you make sure that you meet their requirements, and you provide your knowledge and service to match what they want and with reality of the project. We did went through that few times until we were able to clarify and say that design matches closely with the program and the needs of the client, HIS.
One of the most important kind of aspects of the process that our students went through is that there were dorm students within the planning crew, the team that went through that process. And so they could really lend an authentic experience and what was needed in a dormitory. And so the design that we actually got from the students, when we took it to the architects, they could really honor that original design from the students and basically stuck to it. I mean, obviously there are components that needed to be changed from an architectural standpoint, but the design that we kind of originally presented is the design that basically we have today. So it really has worked out well for our needs as a school.
Construction of the dormitory addition began in the new year, with a groundbreaking ceremony in January of 2018. Over the next 6 months, the HIS landscape began, slowly at first, to change. Before long, what had once been lines on paper began to take shape. Conversations between a teacher and her students, the focus of boardroom discussions, the visions and dreams of so many people were now being rendered in reality by teams of construction workers.
From a personal perspective, there is a real sense of pride to see the building coming together and to reflect back on the kind of collaborative whole community effort that kind of came into putting this dormitory together and having the students as a key feature of that. And to see then now that actually coming to a tangible conclusion is really very exciting.
I really hope the students realize that when opportunities come, you should take them, and that not knowing everything can be overcome with work and collaboration with people that know what's going on. So for the students, I only hope that they realize what they are part of, and even if they choose later on in life not to do anything with the design, the skills and the process stays, the ability to overcome uncertainty, the ability to create, the ability to start from zero and have to produce, I think will stay with any kid that takes that course.
Just knowing that the company that would build the dorm would actually consider the ideas that I came up with for the interiors is just such a big deal for me, because this is going to be a home for so many people. People are going to make memories here when they graduate, and when they think about their school life, they're also going to think about the boarding program at HIS. So to think that I contributed towards making a very comfortable home for someone, that's such a big deal to me, because a lot of my friends will actually move into the new dorm, and to think that I could build a home away from home for them while they're a part of HIS, it's a very, very valuable experience.
When I hear about our school having a new dorm, I was really excited about it, because I was thinking about, wow, our school has been growing a lot, and I think it's always good to have new people coming into the dorm and more people coming to the dorm, because we can know more people and we can also learn a lot of things from them.
To see so many international students benefiting from this project, and to see HIS benefit from their presence at the school is really, very rewarding. We know from international trends that schools, the longer that they exist in a country, they tend to become host culture by population. But the dormitory allows us to really expand on that population and continue to be the international venue that we want to be. And that's been really a really amazing, exciting piece for us. It also brings in the financial stability that we need as a school to move forward, and then to make the next expansion into the future. It is the future of our school.
When I think of the future of HIS, I think of the role I had in designing this building, of working on the science lab and then teaching in the science lab. And then I think of the design process for the dormitory and how students, many students, and specifically Hiro also, they had a hand in designing the dorm. We've been around since 1958, and there's been many people walking the halls of HIS, and their ideas and influences have interwoven to make this community. And I've talked about how it's close and tight-knit, and not only the culture of this school, but the physical aspects of this school really reflect the people that have been here. And so I'm so happy that I've been a part of this, that our students can be a part of the steel and concrete and the culture of HIS.